Under the orange glow of the setting sun, the world seemed unusually quiet behind that small town gas station, the kind of quiet that makes the air feel thick, the kind that whispers something is about to happen. The young female officer had stopped there to take a moment of calm after a long shift, a day spent diffusing tempers, writing reports, and reminding herself why she wore the badge. She wasn't new to danger, but she was new to that kind of silence, the silence that feels like a warning rather than a peace. She had learned early in her training that courage wasn't about the absence of fear. It was about moving forward even when fear stood right beside you. But no amount of training can fully prepare someone for the moment when that theory becomes real. She leaned against her patrol car, breathing in the cool evening air, unaware that just beyond the corner of the gas station, a group of men were watching her. They were not the type who respected authority, the kind of men whose world revolved around dominance, whose pride fed on intimidation. They saw her uniform, her solitude, and mistook her calm for weakness. But courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes quietly, waiting for the right moment to stand tall. It started with one voice, a mocking laugh echoing from the shadows. Then came another. She turned, hand instinctively resting near her belt, but not yet on her weapon. She didn't want to escalate. That was her instinct as an officer and as a human being. But when the first man stepped out, then the second, then 3 more followed, she realized she wasn't dealing with curiosity, she was surrounded. The air felt colder. She could smell the faint mix of gasoline and asphalt, hear the hum of neon lights from the gas station sign flickering above her. Time seemed to slow down. It was in that stillness that she remembered something her father, also a cop, had told her years ago. A real courage doesn't come when you're backed by a team. It comes when there's no one to call, and you still choose to stand your ground. Her mind raced, but her heart remained steady. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to show fear. She took a slow step back, her eyes scanning the group, reading every twitch, every smirk. The leader of the group stepped closer, a cigarette dangling from his mouth, his tone laced with mockery. "What's the badge worth now, huh?" He sneered. The others chuckled, that kind of cruel laughter that tries to strip away dignity, but she didn't flinch. That was her power. She didn't meet violence with rage. She met it with composure. Every inch of her body screamed to react, to defend, but she knew that fear was what they wanted to see. Fear would feed their courage. Calm would steal it away. It's easy to think of courage as loud, as shouting, as fighting back, as force. But the truest kind of courage is quiet. It's the choice to keep your humanity when surrounded by hostility. It's the strength to see your adversaries not as monsters, but as people whose choices led them down dark paths. It's the awareness that you can stand firm without surrendering to hate. She spoke softly, her voice even and deliberate. "You don't have to do this," she said. There was no threat in her tone, just a weary, grounded truth. The men exchanged looks, some with hesitation, others with a cruel sense of confidence. To them, her calmness was weakness, but to her, it was her last line of defense. When you stand alone in a moment like that, courage becomes something sacred, a light that burns quietly inside, guiding your every breath. She could feel her pulse in her throat, the sound of her heart louder than the laughter around her. She thought about her mother's voice, her partner's encouragement, the children she'd waved at earlier in the day. She thought about the badge not as a symbol of power, but as a promise she'd made to protect others, even if it meant facing the storm alone. And yet, she wasn't entirely alone, because true courage has a strange way of summoning unseen allies. Sometimes not in uniforms or authority, but in unexpected hearts watching from the distance. The first punch of fear had already landed inside her, but she didn't let it show. She adjusted her stance slightly, her hand still resting near her holster, not as a threat, but as a reminder to herself that she had a choice. But before she could take another breath, one of the men lunged forward, shouting something foul. Instinct kicked in. She dodged, her training sharp and deliberate, but they were too many. The sound of boots scuffing the ground echoed through the alley. It was chaos, shouting, movement, threat, and still, she didn't draw her weapon. Even in danger, she refused to let fear turn her into someone she wasn't. That's the thing about courage, it doesn't always look like fighting back. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like believing there's still a way to diffuse instead of destroy. At that moment, the tension was so thick it could break the air in two. She was cornered, but she wasn't broken. And that's when courage shifted from being an emotion to being a decision. She took one steadying breath and met the eyes of the man closest to her. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, not as a threat, but as truth, because deep down, she believed that the universe always finds a way to balance what's unjust. She didn't know it yet, but that balance was already on its way. A few hundred yards away, engines rumbled. The kind of low, thunderous roar that makes the ground vibrate motorcycles approaching fast. At first, the thugs thought it was just background noise, something irrelevant to their moment of dominance. But within seconds, the sound grew louder, closer, heavier until headlights cut through the dusk. Before they could process what was happening, the gas station lot was filled with the unmistakable presence of riders' leather jackets, roaring bikes. The insignia that made even criminals hesitate. The Hells Angels, the same group the world often judged harshly, feared instinctively, misunderstood completely. They saw what was happening, a group of men cornering a lone female officer. No one said a word. The leader of the Angels stepped off his bike, eyes cold but steady. In that silence, you could feel the shift power changing hands without a single blow. The thugs stepped back instinctively, and there was that invisible thread between courage and destiny. The kind that connects one act of bravery to another soul's unseen decision to do what's right. Because courage, in its purest form, isn't contagious by accident, it's a light that ignites others. The officer stood still, breathing hard but steady, while the thugs backed away, their arrogance dissolving under the weight of unexpected unity. The Hells Angels didn't act out of glory, they acted out of instinct. Maybe they saw their own daughters in her. Maybe they saw someone who didn't deserve fear. Maybe they just saw humanity where others saw opportunity. And that's the thing, courage doesn't always stand alone. It calls to something deeper in others, something primal and good. In that moment, the world balanced itself. When the dust settled, the officer didn't cry, didn't boast, didn't tremble. She simply nodded, humbled by what had just happened. Because courage had carried her through the storm, and fate had sent help from the most unexpected direction. That night, as she drove home, the world outside her window felt quieter, calmer. She knew she would never forget the fear or the faces. But she also knew she'd never forget the lesson. Courage doesn't just protect you, it reveals the truth about the people around you. It shows who stands by you when there's nothing left to gain. And sometimes it reminds us that light and shadow can stand side by side and still choose to do what's right. Courage is not built in comfort, it's revealed in the face of fear. Sometimes the world paints people in broad, unforgiving strokes. It's easier that way to call someone a villain, a rebel, or a menace, rather than trying to understand the complexity that lies beneath. Society often divides people into neat categories, good or bad, lawful or lawless, right or wrong. But life isn't painted in black and white. It's written in shades of gray, moments of contradiction, and surprising acts of grace. And that truth revealed itself in the most unexpected way that night behind the gas station. The female officer, still catching her breath, found herself standing before the very group she'd been warned about in every briefing, the Hells Angels. To her, they were a symbol of unpredictability. Men known for roaring engines, leather jackets, and reputations that made even the boldest hesitate. She had seen their patches before, heard the stories about their chaos, their clashes, their rules of their own making. But none of those stories prepared her for what she witnessed that night. They didn't come forward with arrogance or violence. They didn't shout or threaten. They stood there still, grounded and silent. The leader, a man with eyes weathered by experience, walked toward her with a calmness that carried weight, the kind of presence that doesn't need to announce itself. His voice was steady when he finally spoke. "You all right, officer?" It wasn't what she expected. There was no mockery, no edge, just a simple human question, and in that moment something shifted. For the thugs who had attacked her, it was a moment of reckoning. The sight of those riders, infamous to the world yet united in quiet loyalty, was enough to drain their bravado. They scattered, muttering under their breath, their courage collapsing in the face of something they couldn't define. And for the officer, it was something deeper, a reminder that kindness can come from the least likely hands. It's easy to think that strength and goodness always wear the same uniform, that those who enforce the law are the protectors, and those who challenge it are the threat. But that night shattered those boundaries. Because when the moment of truth arrived, it wasn't a badge or a law that saved her, it was humanity, raw, unfiltered, and pure. The Hell's Angels didn't do it for recognition. They didn't need applause. They didn't even stay to explain. They acted on instinct, the human instinct to protect what's right, to defend someone outnumbered and vulnerable. Beneath the rough exteriors and the roaring machines were men who understood one unspoken rule of life. Respect isn't about appearances, it's about honor. Honor, that word often forgotten, often misused. It lives quietly inside those who don't speak much, who don't care for praise, who simply do when something needs to be done. And that night, behind the gas station, honor revealed itself through leather, steel, and silence. The officer could feel her heart pounding still, but this time not from fear, from awe. She looked at them, not as legends or threats, but as people. People who had their own code, one that might not be written in any book, but one that mattered when it counted most. She nodded at the leader, a silent thank you in her eyes. He returned it with a brief nod of his own, the kind that says, no need for words. As the engines roared to life again, the air seemed to vibrate with something bigger than noise. It was power, not the power of domination, but of choice. The power of doing what's right when no one expects you to. And that's what makes humanity beautiful, its unpredictability, its capacity to rise beyond the labels we give each other. When the last of the motorcycles disappeared into the night, the officer stood there, motionless. The fear had passed, but something far greater had taken its place, understanding. She realized that sometimes the ones the world fears are the ones who remember what others forget, that we're all bound by the same invisible law of decency. And maybe that's what makes redemption possible, not through words, but through action. In the days that followed, the story spread quietly among the local force. Some didn't believe it. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But for her, it wasn't about who believed her. It was about what she now knew to be true. Heroes come in all forms. Some wear uniforms, some wear leather, some ride into danger without a thought of how they'll be judged afterward. It's a strange, humbling thing to be saved by the very people the world warns you about. But that's the beauty of truth. It doesn't always fit the narrative. Sometimes it rewrites it. The female officer carried that night in her heart like a quiet flame. Every time she passed a biker on the road, she nodded, not out of fear, not out of gratitude, but out of recognition. Because deep down, she understood something that only those who have looked into the eyes of unexpected kindness can know. Humanity wears many faces, and sometimes the roughest ones hide the gentlest souls. The world may always judge by appearance. It may always label, divide, and assume. But life has a way of proving that goodness is not a uniform, it's a decision. And on that dark night behind the gas station, the decision was made by those who didn't care about rules or reputation. They cared about what was right. That night, justice wasn't written in reports or filed under law. It was written in loyalty, in courage, and in the simple act of standing up for someone who needed it. And that, more than any badge or title, is what true humanity looks like. Sometimes the most misunderstood hearts are the ones that remember what compassion feels like.